have no new dinosaurs for you today. Yes, exactly. Hold on 2 seconds. All right. Who doesn't talk about East Timor? Good afternoon. My guest today, and your guest today, will be Corinne Fleischer, the Regional Director for the World Food Program for the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Europe. She will be here in person very shortly to talk about her travels to Ukraine, where she was very recently. Also, just on Ukraine this afternoon, at 3 p.m., the Security Council will convene for a briefing on the maintenance of peace and security. Acting Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Joyce Masuya, will brief the Council on the humanitarian situation in Ukraine. This morning, the Secretary General spoke at the closing of the 78th session of the General Assembly. He said, "We have witnessed a year of continued poverty, inequality, and injustice, a year of division, violence, conflict, and a year that was the hottest on record again." But he added, "This session also closes at a time of growing hope and inspiration that we can achieve if we work as one." He thanked the outgoing President of the General Assembly, Dennis Francis, for his work over the past session. This afternoon at 3 p.m., the Secretary General will address the opening session of the 79th session of the General Assembly under its new president, Philomen Yang of Cameroon. The Secretary General is expected to discuss the ways in which the UN can be a place to find multilateral solutions grounded in dialogue, diplomacy, and the UN Charter. Also earlier this morning, the Secretary General laid a wreath at the memorial of our second Secretary General, Dag Hammarskjöld. He said that the ideals that drove Dag Hammarskjöld are ours to pursue: peace, justice, and shared humanity, adding that the Summit of the Future later this month is an opportunity to embrace the spirit of Dag Hammarskjöld's work and reform our multilateral institutions so they are fit to pursue peace in a changing world. A number of you have asked me for a reaction to what happened in Gaza at al-Mawasi camp, and I can tell you that the Secretary General is deeply alarmed by the continued loss of life in Gaza. He strongly condemns today's Israeli airstrike in an Israeli designated zone for displaced persons in Khan Yunis. The use of heavy weapons in densely populated areas is unconscionable. Palestinians had moved to this area in Khan Yunis in search for shelter, in search of safety, after being repeatedly instructed to do so by the Israeli authorities themselves. As the Secretary General has repeatedly said, there is no safe place in Gaza. He repeats yet again his call for an immediate ceasefire and for the immediate and unconditional of all Israeli hostages and others nationalities still being held in Gaza. And earlier today, Tor Venesland, our special coordinator for the Middle East peace process, in his own statement strongly condemned the attack. He said that international humanitarian law, including the principles of distinction,
proportionality and precaution in attack must be upheld at all times. He also emphasized that civilians must never be used as human shields. Further to the attack on al-Mawasi, the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs led an assessment team to the area today to identify the most urgent needs of the population and to mobilize efforts to meet those needs. UNICEF, the Food and Agriculture Organizations, and other partners took part in the mission, which distributed shelter materials and non-food items, repaired water infrastructure, and provided protection support. OCHA warns that aid workers in Gaza continue to face daily threats to their safety and ongoing obstruction to their efforts to reach Palestinians in need of life-saving assistance. Yesterday's incident involving a UN convoy stopped by Israeli forces is the latest example of the unacceptable dangers and impediment that humanitarian personnel in Gaza are experiencing. The convoy was carrying 12 staff members on their way to support the polio vaccination campaign in northern Gaza. Its movements were fully coordinated with Israeli forces and all details provided ahead of time. When the team was stopped at the al-Rashid checkpoint, they were informed that Israeli forces wanted to hold 2 UN staff members in the convoy for questioning. The situation escalated very quickly, with soldiers pointing their weapons directly towards our personnel in the convoy. The UN vehicles were encircled by Israeli forces and shots were fired. The convoy was then approached by IDF tanks and a bulldozer, which proceeded to ram the UN vehicles from the front and from the back, compacting the convoy with the UN staff inside. One bulldozer dropped debris on the first vehicle, while Israeli soldiers threatened staff, making it impossible for them to safely exit the vehicles. The convoy remained at gunpoint as senior UN officials engaged with Israeli authorities in an effort to de-escalate the situation. The 2 staff members were interrogated by Israeli forces and then released back to us. After 7.5 hours at the checkpoint, the convoy returned to base after being unable to complete its humanitarian mission, but all personnel came back. This incident and the conduct of Israeli forces on the ground put the lives of our staff in danger. It is critical that Israeli forces take measures to protect humanitarian staff and assets and to facilitate their work. This is what international humanitarian law requires. Despite this incident, our partners were able to start the polio vaccination campaign in northern Gaza today. This is the 3rd phase of the campaign and is expected to continue through Thursday. UNRWA says thousands of children in North Gaza have been vaccinated so far. We hope to have the more details later or tomorrow. The World Health Organization says vaccines, cold chain equipment, and finger markers, which are used to track who's actually been vaccinated, were successfully delivered to North Gaza yesterday. Dr. Tedros, the head of WHO, said that work is ongoing to deliver more fuel to ensure the vehicles used by vaccination teams remain functional and to resupply hospitals so that they can maintain essential services. Turning to Lebanon, our special coordinator for Lebanon, Janine Hennis-Plaschert, is continuing her engagement with Lebanese and Israeli officials, as well as regional and international actors, to push for an immediate return to a cessation of hostilities along the Blue Line. She continued to warn of the risks of miscalculation as the exchange of fire between Israel and Hezbollah persisted for 11th month. Earlier in the week, the special coordinator, along with ambassadors of the UN Security Councils, member states, and the European Union, met in Beirut with Lebanon's caretaker Prime Minister, Najib Mikati, to discuss the situation in southern Lebanon and the need to restore calm, stability, as envisaged in Security Council Resolution 1701. Meanwhile, on the humanitarian front, our colleagues are telling us that the humanitarian impact of the ongoing hostilities along the Blue Line is massive. These hostilities are primarily impacted civilians on both sides of the Blue Line, as well as critical infrastructure. Over the weekend, 3 Lebanese civil defense volunteers were killed in an Israeli airstrike. This is a tragic reminder of the immense risk faced by frontline responders. We're again urging all parties to fully uphold their obligations under international humanitarian law to protect civilians as well as civilian infrastructure. Hostilities have driven civilians on both sides of the Blue Line away from their homes and their livelihoods and their schools for months. Turning to Libya, on the third day of her visit to Libya, the Undersecretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, Rosemary DiCarlo, held productive meetings with the chairman of the High National Election Commission, representatives of the High State Council, political party associations, and civil society organizations, including women and youth groups. In all her discussions, Undersecretary General DiCarlo emphasized the urgency of an inclusive political process leading to parliamentary and presidential elections. She underscored that elections remain the only way to break the political stalemate and the only way to restore the legitimacy of Libya's political institutions. In this regard, she reiterated the unwavering commitment of the United Nations to support Libya and the Libyan people in achieving these objectives. Meanwhile, also in Libya, today marks 1 year since the devastating floods killed and displaced thousands of people in the northeast of the country. The Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs estimated that about 884,000 people across 5 provinces were living in areas that were directly impacted by Storm Daniel. The storm brought torrential rains and flash floods that killed more than 4,000 people and displaced some 43,000 others. With the emergency response phase almost completed, efforts are now focused on providing recovery and reconstruction support to some longer-term support. And just moving to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says that ongoing Mpox outbreak has now spread to 23 of the country's 26 provinces, impacting people already facing dire humanitarian situation. As of yesterday, health officials in the country have reported more than 20,000 suspected cases, with 5,050 confirmed cases and more than 690 deaths. The government is leading the response and has launched a $193 million national Mpox response plan. The priorities include disease surveillance and tracing, vaccination, improved lab capacity, as well as health preparedness. We and our partners are preparing to assist with vaccine distribution and ensure the most vulnerable are reached to help stop the virus's spread. 23 confirmed cases have been reported in at least 6 displacement camps around Goma in North Kivu province, and those camps hosting about 130,000 vulnerable people. Humanitarian organizations are concerned about overcrowded displacement camps in the east of the country, as inadequate access to water, sanitation increase the risk of contamination. We urge the international community to come together and provide the necessary funding to mount an urgent and robust response to this crisis. Also, staying in the DRC, peacekeeping colleagues report that earlier this week, a peacekeeping mission and the UN Mine Action Service conducted the first of a series of trainings for 60 members of the Congolese Armed Forces in explosive threat assessments that took place in South Kivu and Bukavu. The training is part of the mission's efforts to support Congolese soldiers with essential skills to effectively detect and manage improvised explosive devices, thus limiting illegal armed groups and logistical capacity and freedom of movement. Additionally, peacekeeping mission today launched an 11-day training program in Beni in North Kivu for national police officers that focuses on investigation techniques related to terrorism, violent extremism, and prison radicalization. And as you may have seen, Vietnam was hit over the weekend by Typhoon Yagi, the most powerful storm in the South China Seas in 3 decades. The storm's impact was most severe in Vietnam's northern province, where it damaged thousands of houses and flooded hundreds of thousands of hectares of crops, including rice crops. The government is leading the response and has evacuated 50,000 people from flood areas and zones prone to landslides and relocated them to safer areas. Following the request of for international support, we are coordinating with the government on relief efforts. Priority includes food, water, sanitation, and cash for to repair shelters. Field assessments are ongoing. and we will update you with more. Tomorrow at 10:30 in this very room, the Undersecretary General for Policy and head of the UN Summit of the Future, Guy Ryder, will be here to brief you on the program and the objectives of the summit. As you know, the summit will take place at UN headquarters on the 22nd and 23rd. Then at 1 p.m., there'll be a briefing by the co-chairs of the Secretary General's panel on critical energy transition minerals, and that's Ambassador Mksato Diseko of South Africa and Director General Dieter Jorgensen of the European Commission. They'll be here to brief you on the panel's report and their work, which they will have presented to the Secretary General just a bit earlier. Edie.
Thank you, Steph. On this incident with the convoy, what kind of clearances did they have, and has the UN protested to the Israeli?
Yes, on your second question. I mean, we've protested. We were in touch with as many, I think, Israeli officials that we could get on the phone with yesterday during the more than 7 hours this was going on. As I said, this had been cleared. This had been cleared along the existing. This had been cleared through the existing procedures that we use every day with the Israeli security forces to make sure our convoys are cleared. I mean, we think we have enough experience in that area not to show up unannounced at a checkpoint.
And just a quick follow-up. What did the Israelis on the ground keep telling the UN drivers and staff?
What do you mean? What do they keep saying?
Well, if they had clearances, what was the objection?
Listen, I can't. We can't analyze where the breakdown in communications were. We can't analyze why the system didn't work at this point because we did everything we were supposed to do. So I think that's a question to ask the Israelis. Michelle, then Benno.
Thank you, Steph. Just a follow-up on that. You said there was the 2 staff members who were taken out and questioned while the rest of the convoy remained there. Do we know what they were questioned about?
They were national staff members, but we made sure that they were questioned in front of the vehicles and in front of UN personnel.
But we don't know what about.
No.
And has this impacted any UN operations in Gaza in any way?
Well, I mean, the polio vaccination campaign went ahead today. These people were part of the support for the polio vaccination campaign, but they weren't carrying vaccines or, these campaigns take a lot of people. So the particular tasks that they were supposed to do weren't done, and they were put in great danger, and one can only assume the tension that they were under. But the polio vaccination, as I said, did go through.
And sorry, just 2 very quick ones. You said they were shot at. Were any of the vehicles hit?
The vehicles were not damaged in a way that they could not be driven back.
And how senior was the most sort of senior UN person in the convoy?
I don't know. Benno?
Michelle asked all my questions, so.
Okay. Amélie, then Benny.
Just follow-up still on the same incident. The vehicle was clearly UN marked,
yes.
Right? Yeah, okay, just to be sure.
Yeah.
And for those of us who are still not familiar with the names of the location, where is this checkpoint?
This was the checkpoint furthest to the west around Wadi Gaza.
Okay. And from the last incident with the WFP vehicle which was fired on, has WFP resumed all its movement since then, since they had
I believe
stopped
they
it?
have. I believe they have. Okay. Benny?
two questions, actually, on two separate incidents. First, on that incident, the IDF obviously said initially, at least, that the people they were interrogating were suspected Hamas people. Do you know for a fact that they weren't?
That they were what?
Hamas
No,
operatives?
they were UN staff. They were spoken to, and the Israeli security forces spoke to them, and they were released. And they went back with the UN, but it took a long time because we did not want to lose eyeballs on our colleagues.
Gotcha. And on the second incident that Torres Land was talking about today, Hamas initially said there were 40 people killed, and the Hamas, the health ministry officially said that there were 18, I think they said, the new number. Israel says that they targeted and they named 4 Hamas top commanders. Why the condemnation if it was people who are combatants that are hiding among civilians?
Well, I would encourage you to read all of Tor's statement. Right?
I read, but it starts with strongly condemn the Israeli action.
The killing of, whether you are talking about 18, whether you're talking about 40 people.
No, I'm not talking about 18. I'm saying that that's what Hamas is saying.
If international law is clear on the need to protect civilians, and I think we've been very clear on calling out and condemning the killings of civilians. We've been very clear on calling out and condemning the use of people using health and other infrastructure as a zone of combat. So, I mean, I'm not going to, I don't feel I need to explain anything more than what we said on behalf of the SG before you came in, and the Tor's full statement.
Yeah, you're saying civilians. You know for a fact that whatever number there is of casualties, that they were civilians?
We know for a fact that there were a lot of civilians who were killed in that attack. Deji.
Yes, also on the incident of the UN convoy, you said 7.5 hours, right? Mm-hmm. Is that convoy belong to UNRWA?
It was interagency. There was UNRWA and other agencies in there.
Okay, you mentioned that there's a high-ranking official communicated to Israel authorities. Is that on site or?
No, what I said is that we were being briefed on this as it was happening in real time yesterday. I think a number of you were in touch with us. To say that we were extremely concerned and nervous about the fate of our colleagues would be a huge understatement, right? So there are procedures in place. We followed those procedures, right? There was clearly a breakdown on the other side, right? So what happens in these cases is that we try to reach senior people on the Israeli end for them to get the message to the platoon and the soldiers on the ground to let our people go.
So Amelie just asked the last incident, the WFP incident. I remember asking you, do you expect any explanations from Israeli authority? Do you have the explanation now for that
I'm not
incident?
aware that we have any explanation.
That's like 3 weeks ago, right? You still didn't have.
I mean, you should ask WFP. I'm not aware that we've gotten any satisfactory answer.
Okay, one last thing about the polio campaign in the northern Gaza. You didn't really mention that much about the campaign now, since of the impact of this incident. Well, a couple of things. First, do you have the pause in the northern Gaza during the campaign? Second, do you has the UN or WHO considered even longer time, an extension of timing of the campaign in the north?
We are getting the pauses that we need for the. I mean, the very localized and limited pauses are happening. Otherwise, the campaign wouldn't go forward. your question about whether you need to extend it is not a question I can answer from here. I think our colleagues on the ground will make that assessment. I mean, I think they were reaching the targets they wanted to reach in terms of vaccination. But obviously, we will get more details as we go along. Gabriel.
Thank you, Steph. The Israeli government admitted to killing the Turkish-American activist in the occupied West Bank. The Israelis say it was unintentional. Does the Secretary General feel that the Israeli government is the proper agency to be investigating itself in situations such as this?
Well, let's see what the full investigation says. I think we condemned clearly the killing of this young woman, and people will need to be held accountable.
In May, an international UN staff member, as you remember, was killed. Has Israel provided any information on that alleged investigation that they're conducting?
On the one who was in the DSS?
Yeah, correct.
Yes, we've gotten some information on that.
And what about the more than 200 other UNRWA staff members that have been killed in Israel?
I don't think we've made any serious progress. No. Sylviane.
Thank you, Stéphane. On the Israeli-Lebanon border, is there a possible new resolution for southern Lebanon that could go beyond the resolution 1701, especially if it involves new arrangement on both sides of the border?
Well, it's not, before we start to speak about new resolutions, let's implement the ones that are already on the books. 1701 is very clear. Has it been fully implemented? The answer is clearly no, and I think the Secretary General has been very clear on that as we go along. Sinan.
Thank you, Stefan. I have a question about Syria. UN Syria Commission of Inquiry launched its latest report today, and the Commission warned that the fighting has intensified along multiple front lines of Syrian conflict, with the region gripped by fear of large scale. Basically, the report says if you go to south, you see Israeli airstrikes. If you go to central and northwest Syria, you see the regime and some other groups torturing and killing civilians. And northeast Syria, you see Turkish airstrikes. So basically, they see this new wave of hostility unlawful. And I wonder if you have a comment on that, and how important is this report to Secretary General?
I think the report offers a very clear and sobering kind of bird's eye view of the situation in Syria. Obviously, it's independent from the Secretariat, but I think we tend to update people here about Syria. I mean, from this podium, in sort of piecemeal factors of what's going on in different areas. I think this provides a very useful overview of the way men, women, and children in Syria who just want to live in peace continue in most parts of the country, in many parts of the country, to suffer from conflict and suffer from the fact that parties involved are fully disregarding international humanitarian law. Ibtisam.
First, follow up on the attack on Khan Yunis. And regarding the claim of the Israeli army that Hamas militant were operating in that area, can the UN independently verify that claim, whether it's true or not?
Sorry, which claim?
The claim of the Israeli army that Hamas was operating, fighters were operating in that area?
I don't think we have the capacity to do so. Nor do we have the mandate to do so. Our focus in Gaza is on helping civilians survive this conflict until a political solution can be found. But we have been very clear in denouncing when our premises are misused, when we've had convoys looted, and when we've seen civilians killed.
On a follow-up on the issue of arm delivery, given the fact of that we have more than 40,000 Palestinians who were killed since the beginning in 1 year, and the number of injured. etc. Does the Secretary General believe that countries who are delivering weapons to Israel should stop that delivery?
I think this question has come up before. What I've said is that any country that sells weapons to another country has an obligation to make sure that those weapons are not used in violations of international law.
And do you believe that countries are doing what they need to do? I mean, are they going?
Not likely. Yvette, then Sarife, and then Benno. Yvonne, I'm sorry, Yvette, Yvonne. It's all French to me. Yvette, Yvonne. Listen.
It's quite a departure, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, just back to the incident involving the two UN staff members, national staff members. You didn't give any details on the line of questioning over those 7.5 hours, but you said...
they weren't questioned for over 7.5 hours. The incident, the incident took 7.5 hours.
Okay, how long?
I don't know how long the...
Okay, but you haven't given any details on the line of questioning. No. Right, can you?
Not especially, but I think it's pretty obvious, and you should probably ask the Israelis what they were asking.
Okay, do you see this as a deliberate campaign of harassment of UN personnel?
Look, what I see it, the way we see it is that the system isn't working as it should, right? As I said before, we did our part. We followed the procedures of the notification system. It clearly was not followed on the other side. The information did not go down to where it should have been, and it was not handled properly. This isn't the first incident, but we've also had convoys that worked, that went through. The notification system worked. I mean, we got the fridges and the vaccines into northern Gaza. So, and we update you regularly on the percentage of convoys that make it in and those that are stopped for whatever reason. We just need the system to work better. Yesterday could have turned out tragically. It just was stressful. It took a long time, but thank God everybody got back safely. But it doesn't take much imagination to think that this could have turned out very differently.
And I do have another question on a completely separate topic, if that's okay. So when the Secretary General was in China last week, he may have seen that a Taiwanese national was sentenced to 9 years in prison on separatist charges. I don't know if he's aware of that. One of the charges that he was sentenced on was campaigning to join the United Nations. Does the Secretary General think that people should go to jail for a desire to join the United Nations?
We believe that people should not go to jail for what they say or what they're thinking. Sarife, then Benno.
Thank you, Steph. I want to go back to the killing of the Turkish-American citizen Ayşenur Ezgi. I was the one who asked you last week about the killing of Ayşenur, and I specifically asked you whether you condemn this attack, and you said that you need to gather more information before you can speak about it. So I want to know, have you gathered more information?
Well, I just spoke about it. I mean, the reason I didn't answer the question when you asked for it, because I had not yet heard of that particular incident.
So now you...
Well, I mean, I answered, I think, the question was asked.
Yes, the question was asked, but I'm just trying to tell you that you said you condemned it, but you did not condemn it. I'm just trying to clarify.
I'm condemning it.
You're condemning it now. Okay, thank you. So the IDF, as Gabriel has said that it was unintentional. Do you think this is acceptable? And how do you evaluate the general increase of violence in the West Bank where there's no Hamas, who the IDF says that they're trying to eliminate? Thank you.
Well, I think I would refer you back to what we've said in the last few weeks about the increase of violence in the West Bank, and also our call on Israeli authorities to abide by international law, notably in law enforcement operations. Benno.
Thank you, Steph. Now I do actually have a follow-up to the convoy. I think Michelle asked about the shots that were fired, and when I read the transcript, it said like you just said something like the cars could drive afterwards or so. So I don't really understand. Shots were fired where to?
I mean, you can shoot at a vehicle without disabling the vehicle.
Okay, so shots were fired at the vehicle,
right?
Not in the air or whatever.
Yeah, shots and fire. Some shots were fired in the air. the shots that were fired at the vehicle were, the way we interpret it, more warning shots. They were not shot directly at windows and people. I don't know if you can see what I'm...
Yeah, I guess so. It would help to get the photos if you have them. Also, another question, will you or have you turned to other countries with influence in the region to advocate on behalf of UN personnel so these situations don't happen every other week?
We continue, and I think you heard, I mean, just to mention a very public statement recently, I think you heard the Deputy U.S. Ambassador, Robert Wood, give a very clear call for the protection of UN staff.
Just really quickly, to clarify.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, just to clarify.
Michelle, please.
It's a really quick one. They were
like you had earlier. Yeah, go ahead.
They were armoured vehicles?
What?
They were
yes,
armoured?
they were. As far as I know, they were armoured vehicles. Gabriel, would you like to ask a question? Or Michelle asked it for you?
It's okay. We're all all colleagues here. Steph, it seems like, given that this is the second convoy in, 2 weeks that has been shot at, you say the system isn't working. This SG condemns the attack on Al-Mawasi. How many condemnations of how many attacks of so-called safe zones have we heard? It seems like this would be a good time for the Secretary General to be able to pick up the phone and call Benjamin Netanyahu. That is still not happening. I know what you're going to say. You're going to say that you have people that are talking to his people at different levels, but come on, Steph. I mean,
I'm not. The situation has not changed. The Prime Minister, we reached out to the Prime Minister's office. They are aware of our request for a call. I think it's a question you can ask them. But we've had Sigrid Kaag met with the Prime Minister, I think last week. So we've had communications. Okay, I will leave you with our guest from WFP, who will brief you on her recent trip to Ukraine, and I will leave you in Fahan's good hands.
Okay. Thank you. All right, great. And now for the second part of our briefing, we have as our guest today, Corinne Fleischer, the Regional Director for the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Europe at the World Food Programme. And she'll be talking primarily about her visit to Ukraine. Ms. Fleischer, welcome.
Thank you very much. Where do I have to press? No,
no, you're set.
Yes, and I will also speak about our operation in Gaza, and I've heard you have covered this extensively already. But let me just start. I mean, the people in the Middle East have not had a break since, over 12, 13 years, with the Arab Spring, protracted refugee crisis, near economic collapse of some of the countries, and then Ukraine, which had a profound impact and still has on food inflation in the Middle East, and now we have Gaza, and all these had a profound impact on people's ability to put food on the table. Today, in what WFP calls the Middle East, Northern Africa, and Eastern Europe region, the countries that we cover there, close to 50 million people are food insecure. This is double from before the Arab Spring, and now WFP has to feed 6 times more people than before the Arab Spring. And now, of course, on top of this, we're bracing for a regional war, and this has to stop because families really can't cope. So I'd like to start with Gaza because I spent a week in Gaza end of July, where I witnessed at that time the people fleeing and following the evacuation orders now the 2 million people crammed in what is 11% of already, a very densely populated strip. And, when you're there, I mean, it's just there is simply no empty space left in Gaza. The beach, when we're at the beach, it's full of makeshift camp, one after the other, up to the shore, wait for, the waves to come in the winter. The road is full of people. And then the UNRWA shelters, are crammed. The one I was in, you could hardly even walk through, 13,000 people in there. 60 to 70 people live in a classroom that usually holds 20 to 30 people. So despite all the challenges you also just talked about, every month WFP reaches over 1 million people in Gaza and also in the West Bank with food assistance, with bread and with nutrition interventions. But beyond that, we use every emergency dollar that we invest in this operation to also help restore, where possible, private sector supply chains. So we do that through the support to bakeries. Bakeries actually have started operating again in Gaza because of the support we provide them. Wheat flour, fuel, also yeast where needed. And we keep the retail shops open because we channel our in-kind assistance. Right now we can't do really cash assistance. We channel our in-kind assistance to the shops that we were working with before. So they keep their people paid and keep the shops open. So then when the markets are back on, they are there. But humanitarian operations have become ever more difficult to carry out. When I was there, it took us 8 hours to reach from Deir el-Balach to the northern crossing, but normally takes 40 minutes. We face endless hours to receive a green light to move. Then we spend hours at waiting points, at holding points, at checkpoints. Roads are destroyed. People are on the road, as I said. We had two flat tires when we were on that trip. And now the winter is coming, and it's becoming even more difficult. Roads will become impassable. So in the last month since I left, we've seen more evacuation orders and the massive deterioration of the security environment for humanitarian staff. So WFP lost access to its third warehouse and last operational warehouse in Gaza, in the middle area, under evacuation order. We lost 5 WFP-supported community kitchen that had to be evacuated, and we lost close to 20 distribution points across the strip. So while we do manage to bring in food, more or less, not enough, but we can't distribute it right now. So we're reaching less people. We reached less people last month than what we usually do. And also, the evacuation orders affected our own staff. They had to evacuate our main operational center with just a few hours' notice for the third time since the war began. So this increased incidents of violence that you were talking about before against humanitarian workers are choking our efforts to prevent famine in Gaza. When 500,000 people are in catastrophic and famine-like conditions. So what we are saying, we need more crossing points. And we need streamlined operations so we don't spend the day in cars but can actually do our work. We need law and order restored in Gaza so that we can travel and have our trucks safely reach the people. And we also need cash to come back to Gaza so that people can start and buying again in the shops. Going to Ukraine, I was there 2 weeks ago, and the situation is also dramatic. I was in Sumy Oblast. I met with people there whose houses were destroyed, and you can feel their exhaustion after so many displacements. I met a man of 65 years old. I asked him for his story. He told me he just left with the pants he has on, carrying them.